Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of Off the Cuff presented by Taylor Timepieces. It's been a while since we've done one of these.
It's true.
You
Too
know,
long.
Just too long. We were looking for a suitable co-host. As you can see, Grayson is back.
I'm back.
I was doing it by myself for a while, and I do love, the solo episodes, but I feel like they aren't as engaging as talking to another enthusiast and friend here. So I would like to make this a little bit more. What do you think? A little bit more frequent than
More
once
frequent, more regular, more dynamic.
Once every 6 months,
All the above.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
once every 6 months wasn't cutting it. There are other things that we do once every 6 months, and that also doesn't cut it. But I guess we'll have to talk to our girlfriends about that. Anyway,
Speak for yourself, Nick.
yeah, man. Anyway, we're here to talk about some watches, and I
Let's do
figured
it.
today we would talk about some watches without box and papers, and how we perceive them in the market, and how we would value them if they were presented to us as. I'm a dealer. Grayson's not a dealer, but I know that we're in talks right now about him working a little bit more closely with the team.
Definitely.
And yeah, you know what? Just to talk about these different brands and how we view them, and how we feel that a watch not having box and papers really starts to affect the value.
Yeah. And we're going to go in order from least expensive to most expensive for the most part. And I think the real key here, and we're going to be starting off with this new iteration of the Seiko Turtle in this like olive drab / gray colorway that has a compass as its bezel instead of a dive timer. But when you're talking about something that's in this price range, couple $100, sub-1,000 universe.
Yeah, you're thinking what, $300-400 for something like that? I mean, those
Yeah.
pieces we're actually in the midst of phasing out right now, but we did keep a lot of those pieces around as kind of these entry level pieces because we think that timepieces should be enjoyed by everyone regardless of their budget.
Totally.
And if we can get somebody that likes a Seiko Turtle and wants to buy it for themselves, or maybe a relative of theirs that's young that wants to get into being an enthusiast, then we would, love to be that stepping stone to, maybe get them in to a Omega or a Panerai a couple years down the road. So that's why
Totally.
we did carry a lot of this smaller stuff. I personally find that when you are dealing with the smaller stuff, it's not as big of a deal. I think for all of these pieces, you got to buy the seller and you got to build that trust. But I think that if something like a Seiko Turtle, as long as you have, good reputation, the seller rather has a good reputation. I feel like there's not a lot of questions. I'm not buying a sub $1,000 piece necessarily worried that I'm getting something that's inauthentic or something that's going to have an issue.
No, and I think with something like this too, this is meant to be worn, and this isn't an investment piece. And even though we think about Seiko, we think about people starting their journey in mechanical watches, this is still a great beater piece. Someone's buying this to wear it, and whether they're a beginner in their collection and they're just getting into their first mechanical watch, or if they want a beater and they're wearing a day date most of the day, or a JLC Polaris, and you're going out of the country, or you're going rock climbing, or you're diving in the ocean, snorkeling with stingrays, you'd probably rather take the Seiko.
Yeah,
right?
it's funny. We're going to be taking a trip to Nashville this week for my birthday coming up. So
true.
If you guys want to send the Zelle will be in the description. But I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing. I mean, even you look at like this Omega that we'll be talking about shortly. I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing something like that on an international trip. Now, people say that like, there's safes, and as long as you're not silly, like it'll be fine. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yep.
And if I know me, and I know that I am a generally disorganized person, And so it's not even the fact that it might get stolen. I might be going out to the bar with my friends and you get too drunk and you set it down and do whatever and then you lose it. You might go like Grayson
Or
said.
someone steals it off your wrist, right?
Yeah,
Which is
someone
becoming a lot
steals it.
more common in
Yeah.
big cities. We live in New York City.
Yeah.
You hear it a lot about it a lot in New York. You hear about it. The most I've heard is London.
Yeah,
One of the most
London.
dangerous places to go with your watch. And so, look, like it's not always worth the risk. Yeah, we love having nice pieces, right? And it's nice to be able to flex and go out to a nice dinner and wear something nice in a safe, controlled environment. But it doesn't need to be every day of your life.
Yeah, and I think that very much touches on the point of like if you're an enthusiast versus someone who likes watches for the status. I mean, listen, I'm not here to judge why people wear their watches, but I think that like if you're all about status in all situations, you're going to be putting yourself in some rough situations that maybe you shouldn't be wearing a green olive Day-Date too. And when shit hits the fan, I would much rather lose possession of a Seiko Turtle than an olive Day-Date.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's totally right. All right, let's move on. Let's go to this piece, which is becoming more and more popular, I feel like, especially these vintage Tudors. It's a Tudor sub from the late 80s, 90s?
I would say
Thereabouts?
so. I would say so. You have to look at the serial number there to get an exact reference on it. But this is cool because and the reason why I think it's cool is because it's the Submariner for those with more, I don't want to say dainty because that sounds rude, but I would say more modest wrists.
Yeah.
It's
It's 36 millimeters.
36
by the way.
millimeters, yeah. So if we didn't disclose that, it is 36 millimeters. I mean, something like this you can get between $4,000 and $5,000. I mean, you're not going to get a Submariner for that, even
No,
a vintage.
not anymore.
Even a vintage.
Back in the
piece.
day, you could.
Yeah, back in maybe the 80s, 90s when this first came out.
Yeah.
But
I remember growing up when a GMT was $4,000.
yeah, I mean, shit, we
used-
might
I
be
used
aging
one.
ourselves here.
Yeah.
But now you get the secondary market. You have 19, 20 grand for a GMT, especially going to the Rolex authorized pre-owned.
Yeah, that's
You
probably
know,
a discussion
they-
for a whole nother video.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean,
Yeah.
crap, they've been wrecking the market there. But
Yep.
I mean, listen, where are you going to get something in this price range that looks like a Submariner that scratches that itch? And listen, not everything has to be what it has to be in the sense that, like, my options are go with this, go with a real Submariner but stretch, or go with a fake. I'm going to tell everyone, get this.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that would say, hey, if I can't afford a Submariner, I'm just not going to have a watch. But at the end of the day, you got to buy what you like. And you got to...
Yep.
I wouldn't want anyone to not feel what it feels like to wear something of this caliber just because they can't afford it.
Yeah.
And
Here's the other thing I'll say too, and we're going to talk about Rolex in a minute, modern Rolex, but the only people who are wearing something like this are real watch geeks, right?
Yeah.
If you see someone with a Tudor, like a 90s Tudor sub on the wrist, you know they're into watches. And you know that you can start a conversation with them and maybe make a lifelong friend.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
listen, a little bit, I don't know if we told you about our story, but that's how we met.
Exactly.
We just met at a watch meetup, and we've been friends going on, 3-4 years now?
That's right, about 3 years.
So, I mean, for me, I just think, like, if I go into something like this and it was presented to me without boxing papers, I would be a little bit more wary. I think because in this fresh range, you're starting to ask some more questions.
Yep.
But I think at the end of the day, it is, you got to buy the seller. And I think something like this is much easier to spot if it's inauthentic because you have the general Submariner-like cues that you would have on a lot of these other watches.
Here's what else I'll say on those two is that I feel like what you're going to run into more when you don't have box and papers to truly authenticate something like a Tudor sub is people aren't really making fakes of a 36 millimeter blue Tudor sub, right? Maybe they're somewhere on the internet,
Yeah.
but I think what you're more worried about is a Frankenwatch.
Yeah.
Something that has parts from, not ultimately a Rolex movement inside, right?
And I think a lot of that is unintentional. I mean unintentional.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like I like to think that the best people. Maybe I'm in the wrong industry to do that, but I think it's just gonna be a lot of people that are like, hey, my Tudor Submariner isn't working right. I'm gonna bring it to Tudor and I'm gonna replace it with a modern bezel or a modern crystal or something like that, and they're gonna dispose of my old crystal.
That too.
And listen, some people like that. They like the fresh paint on the old stuff, but I feel like people, in order to really enjoy a vintage piece, they want all the original parts.
Yeah.
I think that if you took something like this for, like I said, in that $4,000 or $5,000 range, and you started messing with the bezel and messing with the crystal and updating the movement, now it's a cool watch, but it goes from being a Tudor Submariner to a cool Tudor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the reason why you buy this watch specifically is because you're a collector.
Mm-hmm.
So to change out and swap out those things, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. So I think, very much to Grayson's point, I think what you're most worried about in this price range, if you're receiving something without boxing papers, especially a piece like this, is what was replaced and what is an original to the watch, even if it's original to the brand as well. A lot of people don't think
True
like that.
Still a Frankenwatch.
You can put a Tudor bezel on a Tudor, and that would be great, but the parts numbers have to match up.
Yeah.
And you can have you could swap this blue bezel with another blue bezel on a Tudor from another Tudor Submariner, and the parts wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, exactly
So,
right. Unless Tudor is doing it, right?
Yeah, unless Tudor's doing it. But even sometimes, I mean, I've heard people have these horror stories of, hey, I brought in my dad's vintage watch. We have a mutual friend, Alex, who did that. He was bringing in his friend's Omega, and it was an Omega Chronostop, if you recall, and we brought it in, and they made it look great, and they replaced it with Omega parts, and it was brand new and all that, but they got rid of all the old parts. And he said the reason why I got this watch, the reason why I was holding on to this watch, was to have a piece of my dad with me, knowing that this watch was almost as old as I am, and now it's really just the casing with all new parts.
Yeah, it's a total shame.
It's something to keep in mind when you get something like this without the boxing papers. And listen, there are people that care a lot, and if you don't care, that's fine. But one thing to keep in mind as well is I might not care, but if I'm in the business of buying and selling watches, or as Grayson's done, trading up and trading down, the person that is getting this watch might care.
Yeah.
And I talk about that all the time with polishing.
Yeah.
I might not care that my Rolex is polished, but I might get tired of it in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and the person
And the market does.
Yeah, the person I'm selling it to might care.
Yep.
So that's something to keep in mind.
That's exactly right.
This piece is actually pretty interesting. This piece is actually, I don't know the reference number off the top of my head, but the street name for it, quote unquote, is actually the Ben Clymer.
Yep.
And this is a really hot piece. The reason why we chose this piece to showcase is because I think this is a little bit more of a special piece. Something like this, I think a lot of buyers do care if it's boxing papers.
Yes.
Because they are special watches.
Yeah.
I think if you take something like this with a full set, you're looking at upwards of $4K.
Mm-hmm.
And if not more, I mean, I've seen these full sets as much as $6,000.
Pending condition.
Yeah, pending condition. And without that, I think it takes a big hit not having boxing papers.
And I think, maybe it's become more popular, obviously, because of Ben Clymer. I still don't think a lot of people are making fakes of these watches. But again, just similar to this Tudor, you're worried about Franken pieces. You're worried about it not being really complete inside and out. And so I think, like something like this, will get affected in the marketplace not having boxing papers. If you're the type of person that says, look, I'm not going to ever sell this watch. I am a big fan of Ben. I'm a big fan of Hodinkee, whatever. I also love the provenance of the Speedmaster, and I like that this one is more colorful and has an automatic movement, and I don't have to wind it every couple of days. And you're gonna be wearing it. Maybe boxing papers doesn't matter to you, right? You don't wear the box, and you don't keep the papers in your pocket, right?
And
So if you're never gonna sell it.
You also got to think, like, how easy is it to replace those things? So I can get an Omega box.
Yep.
You can get an Omega.
Can't replace the papers.
Can't replace the papers.
Them certified,
but you can get them certified, so
Yep.
stuff like that. You know, if you look at this higher end stuff, AP, the only way you're getting papers is if you bring it into the AP service center. It used to be up until 2021 or 2022, I believe, where you could just bring it in and they give you papers on the spot, archive papers, which in my view are still not as valuable as the regular papers because they don't carry the warranty.
Yep.
But a lot of these higher end brands, which we'll get into it now, have stopped doing that because they recognize the additional value from getting service, and having real papers. I mean, we'll go into a story in a couple minutes about how when we do servicing, we are more than happy to cover servicing from a standard watchmaker, but I always charge additionally for servicing from the factory.
Yep.
Because even though we do get some very fortunate to get some discounts, if you bring if I bring a Rolex in, let's say like this Rolex Batman right here on Oyster,
Yep.
and I can get it serviced by a trusted watchmaker that I've been doing business with for years over in New York. That just makes sure it's running up to spec and it's running as it should, and
right.
It won't have any problems in the future. If I get it serviced by Rolex, that adds additional warranty
And value.
As
in the marketplace.
That to me tells me that means that these papers are so much more important.
Yeah. I think, essentially, when you're going with the top brands and the more expensive of a piece that you have, and the more money that people are spending on something like this, not quite $20,000, but, in that 18 range, then people care, right? That's a big investment of money, and it's a lot of money for almost anyone, right? And so when you're making that decision, you don't want to wait 2 years at the AD wait list. You want to now to commemorate something important or an accomplishment, and you want to make sure that it's going to run, and this is something that you'd be able to pass down.
Yeah, and I would say with buying these sort of pieces, I think a reasonable expectation if I was an end user would be about 5 to 10% in a decrease in overall value. So if I could pick something up for 20 grand as a full set, I would expect to maybe pay 18, maybe 18.5 depending on condition. For a pre-owned piece. I think like Grayson was saying, as you get higher up there, it becomes more and more important. Not only for yourself, but as we were saying before, for the resale value of the watch. I mean, a Patek 5712 is a beautiful piece, but a Patek 5712 without boxing papers that needs extra band and is all message. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, even though the market dictates price, I mean, I think that there has never been a situation where I have boxing papers and it has been a detriment to us as sellers.
No. It only adds to the provenance of the watch by definition. If it doesn't add value, it adds confidence from a buyer's perspective, right? And even though you have a wonderful reputation, if that watch has boxing papers with it, it's even that much more sure that this is the real deal. Yeah, because I mean, listen, with fakes and super clones these days, guys get caught up, dealers get caught up. I mean, we do everything we can to work with some very competent and educated watchmakers who are leagues and bounds above how we act with buying and selling these pieces. But I mean, at the end of the day, people that want to hurt you will hurt you. And I mean, I just think that
having these safeguards, because that's what they are. I mean,
Yeah.
they're safeguards, makes it that much more less likely that you're going to be in a tough situation. You know.
So I think in sum, we talked about 4 watches here, and I think as we went up in price, we also went up in terms of the importance of needing box and papers.
Yeah.
And when you have something like the Seiko Turtle, maybe not as important, right?
Yeah.
When you have something like a Batman, yeah, it's going to affect the value. And hey, look, if you're just wanting to get in as cheaply as possible and you don't really care, you're never going to sell the watch, sure, like it's going to be less expensive for you to get it without box and papers if you're going to take the risk. But for people that are shelling out that much money, they're probably going to go and spend a couple thousand extra to make sure it's the real deal.
Yeah, I also find that like with stuff like the Batman and situations like with the bigger stuff, I find that naked is good if you want to try out the watch or maybe you're looking at doing a trade. I can tell you from a dealer perspective, if I have this, I'm much more likely to trade out of this without box and papers, knowing that it doesn't have box and papers than I would for a full set.
Yep.
So if someone like Grayson came to me and said, hey, Nick, I have a JLC chronograph and I want to trade for a nice modern Rolex, what do you have? I'm always going to offer up the piece without box and papers before I offer up the piece as a full set. And I think most dealers would agree. I mean, listen, if I am on the fence about a Batman and I'm like, I don't know, but I can save maybe $1,500 to even as much as $3,000 to buy this thing without box and papers. And I know, okay, I might wear this for a little bit and it might take a little bit longer to sell, but I have ways of moving the watch. I think that's an avenue I would take as an end user. Yeah. I mean, even I was thinking about my birthday, like I said, is coming up. There's a Speedmaster that I liked, and we did end up selling it because that's how the cookie crumbles. But I mean, I wouldn't mind picking up a watch like that, knowing that I don't care about the box and papers because I know me, I trust me. And I also find that as you go up in price, not having the box and papers or losing that stuff is more important. So if you're a kind of guy like that, like me, who's maybe a little scatterbrained, maybe loses stuff a little bit more quickly, and you might have this with a full set, and you might, put it away in a box somewhere in your attic, and you're not confident that you'll be able to find it in 5, 10 years, 20 years, when you're ready to sell this piece.
You move, things get lost.
Yeah,
a spouse or a family member doesn't really view a watch box as important, so they throw it away to save space.
There's the famous,
happens all the time.
Famous house fire that somehow, all these clients, when they offer me watch without box and papers, tell me that there's been a house fire. And,
right.
I think how many fires are there in New York that everybody's having a house fire. I mean, listen, we make jokes about it, but that stuff happens. So if I know that having a box and papers for this watch is going to cost me $3,000 and losing it is going to cost $3,000 in potential value, and I'm not an organized guy, then I'm going to go with a naked watch. So I think that's important.
Totally. Well, I think that does it for a reinvigorated off the cuff presented by Taylor Timepieces. And so we're going to be looking to bring you content much more regularly in the future.
If we could
maybe bring guests on, some of our friends from the watch dealing community. We're going to continue to show you top end pieces and bring it to you from a young entrepreneurial perspective.
Yeah, awesome, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining us and have a good night.
See you next time.